Hello everyone, welcome to CREDX Live. I'm your host Darshil Khund. Whether you're building your first startup, investing in venture capital, or simply trying to stay ahead of the technology industry, you're in the right place. Every week, we break down the biggest startup funding announcement, explain why investors are writing these massive checks, and most importantly, uncover what founders can actually learn from them. This week, it wasn't just another round of venture funding. It was one of the clearest signals yet about where global innovation is heading. Across three regions, that is United States, Canada and India, billions of dollars has flowed into startup. But here is what it stood out. The largest investment wasn't going into companies simply adding AI to their products. Instead, investor-backed businesses building the infrastructure that will power the next decade of artificial intelligence. That will be like power generation, developer platforms, enterprise software, semiconductor, compliance, national security, and advanced manufacturing. So if you're wondering what investors are looking for in 2026, today's episode will answer that questions. Let's begin. So before we dive into the individual company, let's take a step back and look into the bigger picture. One funding round tells you about a startup, 10 funding round tell you about an industry, and this week industry message couldn't be clear. Artificial intelligence has entered its infrastructure phase. Think back just 3 years back. In 2023, almost every startup has added AI into its pitch deck, right? So in 2024, everyone has launched AI assistants, all kind of different AI assistants, right? And in 2025, AI agent was the hottest topic for the whole year. So now in 2026, investors are asking a much more difficult question. What makes your company impossible to replicate? So the answer they are rewarding aren't based on better marketing, they are based on infrastructure. Companies that provide computing power, companies that secures AI, companies that manages enterprise data, companies that build hardware, and companies that also generate electricity. In other words, I can say that they are investing in businesses that every future AI company will depend on. So that's exactly what today's funding round will reveal, right? So let's quickly look at the one of the biggest funding round before we examine each one by one, right? So together AI has raised 800 million dollars. Shield AI has raised 1.5 billion dollars as a part of larger financing package. Joliant has raised 1.75 billion dollars in strategic investment. Leap Expert has raised 180 million dollars. 8090 Labs has raised $135 million. Reed Semiconductor, they have raised $100 million. And other startup that is Stano, Staker, Halter, 12 Labs, Quantified, and many more. So there are lots of startups who got funded last week, right? And if you have noticed something interesting about this, so none of them is a consumer app. Consumer app barely appear on the list. Enterprise infrastructure has dominated the last week of startup funding rounds. So that shift tells very founder exactly where sophisticated investor believe long-term value will be created. Because so that's where I think most of for most of the company long-term or sorry for the investor long-term value will be created, right? And let's start about one by one, right? So our first story is also one of the biggest funding round, right? So Together AI has announced a $800 million Series C, valuing the company at $8.3 billion. So this round has attracted an extraordinary group of investors, including Aramco Ventures, Nvidia, Salesforce Ventures, General Catalyst, Vista Equity Partners, Emergence Capital, March Capital, Petragon Ventures, and Sentinel One. So the company has also reported that their annual booking exceed $1 billion, and the evidence that enterprise demand for AI infrastructure is continue to dominate. So what exactly does the Together AI do for the audience? Think of it as a cloud platform for organizing and building for organization building with open source artificial intelligence, right? So instead of forcing developers into one closed ecosystem, Together AI gives them the computing infrastructure that need to train, fine tune, and develop AI models at an enterprise scale, right? So that flexibility has become incredible value because businesses increasingly want control over their own AI system, right? They want customization, they want lower cost, they want greater transparency, and Together AI is positioning itself as the infrastructure layer that enables all of it, right? So now here's something what many people might have overlooked, right? If you will close lookly, one of the lead investor, that is Aramco Ventures, right? Why would one of the world largest energy company invest heavily in AI infrastructure, right? Because AI doesn't only consume software, it consumes electricity. And every AI models requires enormous computing resources. Every GPU clusters requires power, and every data center need reliable energy, right? And every energy company increasingly see that artificial intelligence are one of the largest future customers for them, right? This investment isn't just financial, it's strategic, and that theme we will continue throughout the whole today's show. So if you're building an AI startup today in July 2026, ask yourself one question. Are you creating another AI application, or are you building something that thousands of AI companies will eventually depend on? Because history tells us that infrastructure businesses often become some of the most valuable technology companies ever have been created, right? If you see as cloud computing, payment network, internet infrastructure, developer tools, and cybersecurity. And artificial intelligence is now creating another infrastructure views, right? So founders who have solved those foundational problems may be building the future businesses that outlast today's AI hype cycle, right? So let's go to our second story. So our second story may be more important than the first because not only it's another AI company, because it also solved one of the AI biggest infrastructure challenge, that is electricity. Yes, electricity. So Joliant secured $1.75 billion strategic investment from National Grid Ventures. The investment support Project Kilby, a planned 2.7 gigawatts gas powered facility in West Texas that will supply electricity to a Microsoft opted AI data center under long term agreement. Think about what it means. So, for decades, company built data center where electricity already existed, right? But today, companies are beginning to build the data centers and power plants specifically just for AI, right? So that represent that one of the biggest shift in decade for infrastructure. And artificial intelligence is changing where energy get built, right? And who finance it and how it's get delivered to them, right? So every major technology revolution creates new supporting industries, right? So the industry created cloud computing. Sorry, so the internet created cloud computing. Cloud computing accelerated cybersecurity. Artificial intelligence is now creating entirely new market around electricity, like cooling, power delivery, semiconductor, networking, and physical infrastructure. And many founders think that biggest opportunity is just building another AI application. But venture capital increasingly believes that the largest businesses may actually come from enabling the companies building those applications, right? And that's a very important distinction to do, because artificial intelligence infrastructure and strategic capital, and we are only getting started, because we will examine why investors are pouring more money into enterprise messaging, AI software engineering, national security, and semiconductor technology. And those stories reveals exactly where venture capital believes the next $1 trillion of value will be created. So stay with us and let's get to the AI, artificial intelligence, that has entered the infrastructure era. Second, the company receiving this biggest investment aren't necessarily the one with the flashiest product, right? So they are the ones solving the very hardest problem. Now we are moving from power plants to boardrooms, because one of this week's biggest investment theme wasn't consumer AI, it was enterprise AI, the software that helps businesses actually use artificial intelligence safely, securely, and at scale. So, our next company isn't just building another AI chatbot. Instead, it's solving an almost every large enterprise faces. So, Leap Expert has announced an $180 million growth investment led by Riverwood Capital. So existing investor also participated, reflecting continued confidence in the company long-term strategy. And the company enables businesses to maintain communication across all platforms such as WhatsApp, iMessage, SMS, and Signal, while maintaining the compliance and creating structured enterprise data for AI application. So now imagine you are running a global bank, right? And there are thousands of employees who communicated with customer every day, right? Some of my conversation might be happening through email, other might be happening on a WhatsApp, some might through Signal, or other might through the text messages, right? So now imagine regulators asking you to provide every client conversation related to one transaction. That becomes almost impossible when conversations are scattered across personal devices, right? And Leap Expert changes that. The platform captures, governs, and organizes those conversations and into very secure and enterprise system. So what sounds like a compliance software, it actually becoming an AI infrastructure, because AI cannot analyze conversation that aren't properly captured, right? So artificial intelligence is only as smart as the data it receives. So if your company has the most valuable customer conversation and are hiding inside personal messaging apps, right? AI can't help. Leap Expert transform that fragmented conversation into structured business intelligence. And that's why AI will be the future for data layers for enterprises. And that's why investors see much more than messaging software. They see essential data layer for enterprise AI, right? And here is one of the most important reminder for every founder. The biggest opportunity aren't always obvious. Customer rarely get excited about compliance software, but enterprise pays million for it. Why? Because solving one expensive problem is often more valuable than creating another nice to have feature, right? Professional investor understand this, and that's why enterprise infrastructure consistently produce enormous companies. So now let's move to the enterprise communication. From enterprise communication to enterprise software creation. 8090 Labs has raised $135 million round in Series A led by Salesforce Ventures. Founded by Chamat Palpetia in early 24, the company is building an AI-powered enterprise development platform called Software Factory, designed to help organizations generate production-ready software with governance testing, and enterprise control built directly into the development process. So now you have probably heard of a GitHub Copilot, right? Or Cursor, or Claude, or ChatGPT. These tools help developer write code, but large enterprise needs something much bigger. They need systems that integrate security reviews, or compliance reviewers, and automated testing, quality assurance, documentation, deployment, governance. In short, they just don't need just AI that writes the code, but they also need AI that builds software responsibly. So that exactly the opportunity Software Factory is targeting, because this represents the next stage of AI assisted software development. Instead of helping one engineer, platform like Software Factory aims to help thousands of engineers collaborate more effectively. And that is definitely larger market opportunity, right? When strategic investor lead funding round and pay attention, Salesforce isn't simply investing because it expects financial return. It's understand like where enterprise software is leading, right? And large organizations increasingly expect AI to become part of every development workflow, from planning to coding to testing to development, right? And when company operating inside an industry begin investing heavily in startup, they often telling us that what the future look like because everyone else notice, right? So that's a great insight to look at. So let's move on to our next story. Our next story will take us into the one of the venture capital fastest growing sectors, that is defense technology. So let's head to defense technology. Yes, Shield AI announced 1.5 billion in Series G financing, that is a part of a broader 2.25 billion capital package valuing the company at approximately 12.7 billion dollars. So the company developed HiveMind autonomous pilot software selected for the US Air Force Collaborative Combat Air Force program and projects more than $540 million in revenue during 2026. So just a few years ago, many venture firms avoided defense technology altogether. And today, some of the world's largest investment firms consider it one of the most important innovative sectors. Why? Because modern defense increasingly depend on software, autonomous system, artificial intelligence, computer vision, sensors, cybersecurity. The battlefield has now become more digital, right? And Shield AI isn't just building the drones, it's building the autonomous decision making system. So imagine aircraft capable of operating without GPS, without constant communication, or without continuous human control. That's the future of autonomous software is helping to create, right? And those technology won't stay inside defense. Eventually many will move out into logistics, mining, agriculture, manufacturing, and emergency response. So this technology will be helpful for not just for the defense but for a lot more other sectors as well. And history has shown that technology developed for defense often find commercial application years later, right? So far today we have explored like the enterprise software, AI development, compliance, and autonomous defense system. But one of the most overlooked investment opportunity still remains semiconductor infrastructure. And we will look at read semiconductor, why precision hardware is one of the AI biggest bottleneck, and how company like Helter, Stano, Straker, and 12 Labs are quietly building the next generation of AI infrastructure. So let's head to the next part. So far, as we explored one major idea, right? So the biggest opportunity in artificial intelligence aren't necessarily the application we see today, right? They are the technologies working behind the scene. That's like infrastructure or power or enterprise software or maybe autonomous systems, right? Now we are moving more deeper into the technology stack because if AI isn't going to transform every industry, someone has the hardware, someone has to build the data, someone has to build the security, and that's exactly where our next company will come in. So let's begin with one of the week most overlooked funding announcement. Reed Semiconductor has announced an oversubscribed 100 million finance backed by leading semiconductor companies. So this company developed AI powered delivery technology designed specifically for AI data centers, addressing one of the industry's fastest growing challenges. So now most focus on NVIDIA. Everyone knows GPU, right? But GPU are the only one piece of the incredibly complex machine, right? Inside every AI server, power must be delivered with incredible precision. Voltage has to be stable, heat must be controlled. Every component must communicate perfectly. If any one of the system fails, performance drop drastically, and that's where exactly the Reed semiconductor fits. Because think about like a F1 car, right? The energy matters, so does the brake, the suspensions, or the tires, or the steering. Championships are won because every component works together. Artificial intelligence infrastructure work exactly the same way because companies solving this hidden engineering problem may be some of the most tomorrow biggest winners. Now, AI is creating incredible opportunities, right? But it's also creating entirely new security challenges. Mountain View based Tracker announced 64 million Series A, bringing total funding to approximately $85 million. This company describes itself as an agentic security company, helping organizations secure AI agents as they begin performing the increasingly important business tasks, right? So let's think about where enterprise software is leading, right? So today, employee access company system. Tomorrow, AI agents will do it. And those agents will improve invoices, analyze contracts, read confidential documents, will manage customer service, access financial record. And this traditional cybersecurity company wasn't designed for autonomous software workers. Stracker believes an entirely new security layer is required, and investors clearly agree with them because history repeats itself. Every major technology waves create a security wave shortly after. The internet created cybersecurity, the cloud computing created cloud security, the mobile created mobile security, and now AI is creating AI security. That may become one of the largest software category of the decade. Because I think when people imagine AI, most picture office buildings, software developers, or Silicon Valley. Very few imagine cows, right? Yet, one of the week's biggest funding round comes from agriculture. Halter raises $220 million at a valuation of approximately $2 billion, and this company built AI powered smart collars for cattle. These collars create virtual fences, track animal behavior, monitor grazing behavior, and help farmers manage entire herd using AI. And perhaps more economically, the platform has already analyzed more than 7 billion hours of animal behavior, creating one of the world's largest proprietary agriculture data sets. And here is why the investor love business like Holter because nobody else has that data. You cannot download it, you cannot scrape it, and even you cannot generate it overnight. It requires years of working alongside those thousands of farmers, and that's what VC called a moat. Not because competitor cannot build like a similar software, but because they can easily recreate, or they cannot easily recreate years of real world corporate operational data. And in the AI economy, unique data become more valuable than algorithms themselves. Because so now let's move from agriculture to the courtroom. Stano has raised $49 million in Series C, bringing total funding to approximately $150 million. Unlike many startups, Stano doesn't purchase data, it generates it own. Every court proceeding, every deposition, every transcript. Those records continuously improve its AI platform called Transcript Genius, helping law firms search and analyze legal proceedings more effectively. This is another important lesson. The most valuable AI company increasingly generate proprietary information instead of licensing it. That make their competitive advantage stronger every year. Because now let's look at the company we have covered today, right? Let's pause for a moment. Yeah. So look at the companies what we have covered today, right? Together AI, Jolan, Leap Expert, 8090 Labs, Shield AI, Reed Semiconductor, Stracker, Helter, Stano. These all are from different industry, different founders, different customers, and yet one of them solve a foundation problem: infrastructure, power, compliance, security, hardware, or proprietary data. This isn't a coincidence; it's a signal. So investors are increasingly funding the companies that enables the AI economy. Now simply participating in it is not going to worth it, because we will examine in the next thing how artificial intelligence is beginning to understand the video, why national security continue attracting billions of dollars, and several additional funding announcements that may deserve your attention as well. And finally, we will answer the most important question of the today's show. What does this week's venture capital actively tell us about where technology is heading over the next 5 years? Sorry. So throughout the episode, we talked about infrastructure, power, enterprise software, defense, security, semiconductor. But artificial intelligence still faces one enormous challenge: understanding video. Humans watch videos naturally. We understand emotions, moment, intent, context. Computer doesn't. Not yet. That's exactly why the investors are backing our next company, because this might be the future. So 12 Labs has announced a 100 million Series B to expand its multimodal artificial intelligence platform. Because unlike traditional computer vision, which simply recognize objects, 12 Labs aims to understand entire videos. So the company developed AI capable of intercepting actions, conversations, emotions, sequence of events, and conceptual meaning within video context. Technology with application ranging from enterprise search to media intelligence and security. So the round ranked among the significant AI financing. So imagine asking an AI, show me every customer who look confused, or find every safety incident inside this factory, or locate every moment where the speaker mentioned pricing. So instead of watching those thousands of hours of footage, they understand what happened. That's an enormous productivity environment, right? And every day, billions of dollars are created because of this. Security cameras, hospitals, factories, retail stores, sports, education, entertainment. Most of that information has never been searchable, and companies like 12 Labs wants to change that, right? So let's move to the next funding round, that is quantified. So artificial intelligence isn't only helping company grow, but it's helping governments find. Yeah. So artificial intelligence isn't only helping company grow, it helps government and financial institution reduce risk. So Quantify has secured a 200 million growth investment from Summit Partner. So the company uses artificial intelligence to identify financial crimes, sections violation, fraud risk, and hidden relation across enormous data set. Think about how financial investigation has begun. Millions of transactions, thousands of organizations, global supply chain, complex ownership structure, and humans simply cannot process all of this information quickly enough, right? So artificial intelligence can. And that's why risk intelligence has become one of the fastest growing enterprise software categories. So we have covered dozens of funding rounds today, right? Now let's answer the biggest question. Why do they tell us? After reviewing every major funding round this week, five clear trends emerge. The first one is the largest investment weren't the consumer product. They were infrastructure, cloud computing, energy, security, semiconductor, enterprise software. So what's the lesson from them? So the lesson is build technology other companies can depend on. Second, companies like Holter, Shield AI, and Stano don't simply just build the software. Every customer interaction create data competitor, like they cannot copy easily, right? So create that data that competitor cannot copy easily, that makes their AI smarter over the period of time. The third one is energy companies, banks, semiconductor manufacturers, defense organization, technology giants. They are investing because this startup solves problem directly affecting their own businesses. That is also a very powerful signal. The fourth one is that AI is leaving laptops, is entering factories, aircraft, agriculture, healthcare, robotics, manufacturing, you name it. The physical world may become the AI largest market. And the fifth, the company attracting the biggest investment aren't winning because they mention AI. They are winning because they solve very difficult problems like power generation, security, compliance, infrastructure, unique data, right? Real customer demand. Those fundamentals matter more than just the buzzwords. And my final thought of this week. So, if today's episode can be summarized in just one sentence, it will be this: AI is no longer the destination, it's becoming the foundation. So, the biggest company of the decade may not be the one who is creating the smartest chatbot, but they are the companies providing the electricity, the semiconductor, the cyber security, the compliance system, the enterprise software, the robotics, and the infrastructure making the AI possible. History rarely remembers who built the first application. It always remembers who built the platform everyone else depends on, right? And that's exactly where venture capital is placing their biggest bet today. And so that's the whole US funding round captured from last week. Thank you so much for everyone to joining us on the CREDX live. our first episode. If you have found today's analysis valuable, right, share it with a founder, investor, or operator who wants to stay ahead of where technology is heading. Tomorrow, we will travel north to Canada and examine how deep tech, defense, semiconductor, and AI are reshaping one of the world's fastest growing innovation ecosystem. Until then, I'm at Darshil Koot. Keep building, keep investing, keep learning, and we will see you next time on CREDX Live. Thank you so much for coming and have a good day.